Um, so as I was describing, we're joining lots of data sets for our members and patients. And the real goal is to just help patients have a better experience, not just with their healthcare, but with their health overall. And we know that clinicians don't love listening to insurance companies when it comes to caring for patients. So we know that if we're going to be successful long term with this program, we've got to get clinician buy-in, understanding, and over time, adoption. So we think that one way to potentially do that, and I'm still trying to get these slides to work here, um, is to partner in research. So we are working to take a lot of the work that we're doing in care model development and show that we can both improve outcomes for patients and at the same time lower their utilization and cost. And we're working to partner with academically minded folks to help us collect all this data and publish it in journals that clinicians read. And over time, to hopefully get Highmark Health branded in those journals as a trusted participant in this type of research. We also want to make it encouraging for other provider systems to join us in this work. And we hope that by making our data accessible to researchers, that data being utilization, costs in large populations, hopefully allow them to differentiate their research from that of their peers where maybe they don't have quite as much data access and make it appealing to partner with Highmark long term. And then finally, by trying to link clinicians at AHN to their colleagues at other provider partners, kind of grease the gears for future collaborations as Highmark is trying to standardize the care for its members. So we're trying to offer seed grant opportunities for folks to collaborate with the folks at AHN. So that's a big picture of what we're doing and how we're trying to do it. There are really, I think, two ways for us to engage in meaningful partnerships. The first is to offer to Highmark members some new innovation in care delivery. Maybe today it's something that Highmark medical policy says, sorry, we won't pay for that. We have mechanisms where we can, for a provider partner, change that medical policy decision temporarily, collect data about an intervention, and then use the data to inform a future medical policy decision about that intervention. We can also study new payment models. We'll pay you in a bundled way for something that's offered to Highmark's members, and we'll follow them longitudinally to see if by doing so we can not only improve their outcomes, but reduce their overall utilization of services. So I'm going to give you some examples of programs that we're doing among AHN and Highmark that are of this type, and even a couple that we're already started to do here at Penn State. And then there's also data research opportunities, and those exist in a couple of buckets. One is, I told you we process claims for 13 million people. I know that many people can get access to claims data through different services and by requesting information. There are oftentimes limitations in that data set. You can't get all the granular information you want. You can't get home zip code. You can't get all these other things. With appropriate IRB approvals, we can do all those things. So I think we can do some interesting claims-based analysis on the 6.5 million people that I described, who, by the way, are covered by commercial insurance, Medicare Advantage insurance, Medicaid, dual eligible members. So there's all sorts of different populations that we can look at. Other things that we could do is if you wanted to study an intervention that's being delivered here at Penn State, there's a subset of those who got that intervention who are Highmark members. So now we can join an individual's discrete claims information to the EMR data that you've already collected, and potentially, again, augment the data that you have with other longitudinal data that might not be fully visible. Because if, for instance, a patient gets care someplace outside of the Penn State health system, you might not know about it, but for a Highmark member, Highmark does. So we can get full visibility to all of those things. And then we've also been doing some work where we're joining the patient data at AHN with the patient data here at Penn State, and ideally powering studies in some unique ways. Maybe we have access to certain demographics and populations in Pittsburgh that aren't here. Maybe by joining our data sets, we better cover rural and urban areas and maybe get a more representative data set. So I'm going to give some examples of work that's already going on in that space. And I'm doing this really with the goal of just giving you visibility to what can be done so that we could talk about some future projects that we might be able to do together based on your interest and a basic understanding of how this infrastructure works. So I'm just going to dive in now to a couple of examples. This first example is focused on an intervention for insomnia. We looked at Highmark's membership, and we found that individuals with insomnia on average cost more than 2 times per member per month what those demographically matched members cost who don't have insomnia. So we wanted to develop and test an intervention to see if we can move the needle on some of those costs. So in this case, we engaged a group at Stanford to educate clinicians at AHN about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Started with 12 trainees, got 11 through the program, and have been collecting data now on, I think more than 100 patients are in the program, but our first publications just focusing on the first 48 of them. You can see in the little figure on the right, the insomnia assessment scores for those patients prior to and then after the intervention. You can also see their PHQ-9 scores, and in aggregate there is that sort of dark line. So it's really making a difference for these individuals clinically. There are, I think, at AHN of this group, somewhere on the order of 30 of them who are Highmark members. And since this time, this number's obviously grown significantly. We're now tracking the cost and utilization of these individuals to see if now by turning the knob on insomnia, we also lower their overall utilization and costs. So we can do these kinds of analyses with lots of different interventions, and would love to talk with you about interesting ones that we might work on together. This slide is describing a COPD care model that we launched at AHN. All discharged patients would be placed into this program with physician management. There's a collection of nurse navigators and other clinicians involved in the program that sort of protocolize the post-discharge care for these patients. They had to have an inpatient consult with a pulmonologist within, I think, 72 hours of discharge. They had personalized follow-up at some frequency, depending upon the stage and severity of their COPD. And the figure on the right shows for the first 110 Highmark members that came through that program, a comparison of their per member per month spend pre and post insertion in the pathway. And each one of those colors represents a different type of expense. The blue bars are associated with inpatient care. I think the pink one is drug spend. So if you look at the slide pre and post, actually post, we spend more per member per month on medications, but the real impactor here is that their utilization of inpatient services was dramatically reduced. And in this case, the costs are significant, right? So in aggregate, it's $700 per member per month. So you're talking about $8,500 on average, the cost savings per member in this program. So this program is particularly labor intensive. It takes a lot of skilled labor. It's really difficult to scale this in mass. So we're now working on an intervention that's a little bit less labor and a little bit more tech enabled to try and better scale this to other hospitals and other populations. I think this work was published in the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst paper, which if you're interested, I can send more details on it. This is an example of a program that we're actually simultaneously running at both Hershey and AHN. This is an intervention for migraine patients. In this case, when a patient starts to feel a migraine coming on, they place this armband around their arm that drives some neuromodulation. There's some prescribed or described mechanism by which it works. I may not necessarily believe their mechanism, but the device was FDA approved, and each of the clinics at AHN, the headache clinic at AHN and at Penn State, had good experience with this intervention for patients who would pay for it out of pocket. No insurance plan paid for this to be used in a member. They all viewed it as being experimental and investigational. So in this program, we said, forget about that. We'll, for the headache clinic, these two headache clinics, you can offer this solution. And in just 7 months, 525 Highmark members have been able to get access to this intervention at those headache clinics. We're seeing good utilization of the system, high numbers of patients who have it prescribed actually turn the device on and are using it. And now we're tracking it, not only through the lens of the patient, but also for the clinicians that are offering it. You can see here some of the quotes from the clinicians. The fact that they're able to offer this without adding another drug to a patient is really appealing to them. And we're now probably almost a year into this, so we'll start to have some good outcomes and utilization data from this program probably by the end of the year. I describe this not only because it's a great collaborative program across two large practices, but earlier this year, PCORI came out with an opportunity to study migraine prevention technology. And this technology was approved by the FDA for migraine prevention in April, and this call came out in May. So when we saw it, it occurred to me that we, in this collaboration, have more data than was ever published for this company to get an FDA approval. So we were uniquely positioned to pursue this PCORI grant and use this as a preventative measure. So we submitted a $12 million LOI. We were invited to submit a full proposal, which we did in the middle of the year. And I think we'll get scores in the November timeline. So fingers crossed, but maybe this program is now going to really leverage a big research opportunity across the two campuses. So that's kind of in my job description of the sort of thing that I'm supposed to be enabling. So this was a beautiful use case for me, and really something that we'd love to encourage. So hopefully those are some useful examples of the kinds of things that we can do together. Let me see if I can advance this. So this next slide is meant to talk about the more retrospective types of data that we can collect. And before I get to that, it's a little bit hard for me to see the slides. We're really here describing what our goals are for the future interventions that we can offer. So We love to run programs on FDA-approved interventions that the insurance company today says we don't pay for. Because it's a great way to do innovative work together, and it can really leverage having an insurance company as a partner. So we'd also like to find opportunities to improve experiences for clinicians and patients at the same time. So new interventions that would potentially benefit all those parties are of particular interest. And then the last point that I would make is we don't take these programs without considering the financial impact of them. And we're willing to pay more for an upfront intervention if there's a value proposition where there's a potential ROI that's going to lower utilization for an individual member. So normally when we pitch these types of programs to Highmark, not only are we talking about health outcomes, we also talk about health economics. And if you need help in making a financial argument, we can get access to Highmark's data to help to make that argument if and when you want to propose a new idea. So I'd love to talk with anybody who has ideas about these things. I'm going to be here all day tomorrow to start some conversations, and would love to have follow-up with anyone interested in this kind of thing. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about retrospective data. I mentioned we've got 6.5 million covered lives. We have data from AHN and Epic that's pretty accessible for outcomes-based studies. We can do all sorts of longitudinal data analyses. Folks in Western Pennsylvania aren't all that mobile, so we do have pretty good data over long periods of time. And we have a dedicated team of people at Highmark Health who are keen to engage in this type of work. I've put 3 names on the slide of kind of key people. Richard Clark is the Chief Analytics Officer at Highmark Health. He's responsible for assembling all these data assets and is lead on rolling out our implementation of the Google Cloud platform that Highmark's new IT infrastructure is all built upon. Emily Brignone handles social determinants of health data at Highmark, which I know is of great interest. And Emily's been collaborating with a number of you in the diseases of despair work and other places. So she's a great resource. Tyson Barrett is a PhD statistician who has a team of 5 people under him who we pay for exclusively to do research with Highmark's partners. So we've got a dedicated team that's just really looking for the opportunities to participate in research collaboration. So there are resources there to enable this work. I've got a couple of examples of those. This first one, many on this call likely know much better than me. We followed 12 million people that Highmark's claims data had access to and followed diseases of despair as an outcome for large groups of people, studying them in different geographies and different subpopulations, really characterizing the negative effects that rurality have had on a large number of people. And now there's been more recent uses of this data that show how despair is related to other health-related outcomes. I think you just published on a link to cardiovascular diseases. So it's a great way to make use of this longitudinal data set that, again, these studies are covering 10 years of longitudinal data for millions of people. It's really not easy to get access to that sort of data set. So I think that's a great example. This is a more recent study that we did, which is just about to publish in the journal Ophthalmology. This is a program where we were focused on cataract surgeries, and every discipline and the societies of the disciplines involved in the care for patients having cataract surgery say that there's no need to do a pre-surgical workup on these patients for clearance for cataract surgery. There's no health risk associated with it. But there's still publications that say they're still happening. So we did a look at Highmark's data set. I'm reminding myself the date window by looking at the slide. 2018 to 2021, we had 118,000 members who had a cataract surgery over that window of time, many of whom had 2 procedures. And in this case, 75,000 of them had continuous enrollment over the study period. We wanted that so we could see and have good understanding of their health condition prior to the surgery and then monitor them after the surgery to see the effects. We found that 40% of those members were still getting a referral to a pre-surgical clearance, and half of those individuals also had tests associated with EKGs and blood panels being done, et cetera. When we analyzed those members, we saw no differences at all in any of the outcomes that the members saw, whether they had pre-surgical clearance or not. And we saw that there were no differences in the members themselves. They looked exactly the same, except for their care team. So what you see in this figure is that each one of these dots represents an ophthalmologist who performed at least 5 procedures on a Highmark member. If they're higher on the chart, they did more. If they're lower on the chart, they did less. And these represent numbers of members in the study. And you could see that for the bulk, for a number of surgeons, they sent almost none of their patients. This x-axis here is the percentage of this clinician's members who had pre-surgical testing. And you can see there's a whole bunch over here that are doing it routinely. These slides on the left show, in this case, the green dots are pre-operative patient visits. And you can see that these are predominantly MA members. So there are some baseline number of pre-surgical visits. That's because they were getting all sorts of other procedures in the study. And you could see in the month prior to the cataract surgery, there's a big jump in that now almost 40% of those members. And these are all coded as pre-surgical clearance visits. So it's explicit in the claim as to why they had the visit. And even if you follow those just general visits, you can see an uptick. So there are some visits happening that aren't even being coded as pre-surgical clearance, but this is all waste, right? And what you could see down here is in total, this is $5-6 million a year that's just totally being wasted on these studies and providing no real value. So as I mentioned, this is in the process of being published, and now we're trying to work to do some education, not only with the ophthalmologists that show up in the right-hand part of this chart, but with the primary care practices who are managing members. Many of them are on incentive payments, and they should know that if they're referring their patients to these ophthalmologists, it's driving up costs for those members, and it's not benefiting anybody. So we're trying to make use of this research in general business practices as well. I have 1 or 2 more examples because I just want to give you a better feel for all these things. This study is looking at microdiscectomy. This is a minimally invasive procedure done with a herniated disc. And the good outcomes in the eyes of neurosurgery is an extended period of time after the surgery without additional back surgeries. And most importantly, no additional microdiscectomies or even worse, a fusion. That would indicate that this discectomy was not a good outcome for the patient and likely should have never been done in the first place. So with Highmark's data set between 2016 and 2021, we could see 8,200 members who had a discectomy. A significant fraction of them had 1 year of continuous enrollment following, and the majority of them at least 2 years of follow-up data. And we asked a bunch of questions of the data. What did these members look like before they had the procedures? What did we find? And so what these charts are showing is the percentage of the group that progressed, in this case, to having a fusion as a function of time, right? So we're looking at a 2-year window post-index procedure. And you could see in this case that about 6.5% of those individuals progressed to have a fusion in that 2-year time window. That's in line with what the literature said that we should expect to see. You could see over here, members analyzed by age. It's not exactly as you might expect, because in some cases, here are the younger members progress at the slowest rate, so that makes sense. But the 50 to 59-year-old members are at the top of this chart. You might not have expected that. So what we did see here, which was most interesting, is that Charleston Comorbidity Index has a major effect, and those individuals that had a Charleston Comorbidity Index of 1 or greater were more than 2 times likely to have this adverse event. So at AHN, we're now protocolizing a review before we do a discectomy on anyone that has a Charleston Comorbidity Index of 1 or greater, as a way of trying to avoid some of these adverse outcomes. So this paper's now with Spine Journal for consideration for work. Again, in this case, the other nice thing that we were able to do is validate the Charleston Comorbidity Index data that sits at the insurance company, because somewhere on an order of 1,000 of these patients got their care at AHN. So we went into the EMR for those individuals, and we looked at medical history to see if the EMR version of a CCI correlated with what we saw in claims. And it was remarkable how well they aligned. We didn't expect that we would see that. So it was a good way of validating that data set, and a way, I think, to differentiate our claims data research from that's being published elsewhere, right? So I think it's a unique capability that we can offer. Last one, I just got this data yesterday and it was cool, so I wanted to show it. This is a study looking at Entresto utilization. Entresto is a drug that's used for patients with class 2 and class 3 heart failure. It's used as a replacement for the more traditional ACE and ARB inhibitors that are used in this patient population. And in clinical trials, it significantly reduced or improved mortality in patients, and it also reduced hospital admissions by 40% in the clinical trials. So we have at Highmark good data on roughly 4,000 members who've been on Entresto for at least a year. And we looked at them in detail. We then found demographically matched members who we think are good matches. I'm still working with Larry Sinaway and others to analyze this data to figure out exactly if we have the right match cohort. The graph on the left shows per member per month spend in total on those individuals. The purple line is those on Entresto. The blue line is those not. And in this case, it looks like the expenditures are higher for the Entresto group. The reason for that is Entresto is expensive. It's roughly $500 per member per month in that program. It's around $6,000 a year. And that's basically the delta that you see in those two lines. The image on the right shows inpatient activity on a per member basis. And that purple line and the blue line almost overlap perfectly. You'll note this is spending on inpatient admissions. The purple line looks like it jumps up a little bit at the end. That's in part because there are more commercially insured members on Entresto, and their inpatient admits cost the insurer more than the others. So that's why it looks like they're more expensive. if I just showed inpatient stays, those lines overlap perfectly. So through our first look at this data, we can't see any benefit at all in Entresto in this 4,000 member population. Before we would do anything with that, obviously, we got to scrutinize this data to make sure we've got a good match cohort, and we're in the process of doing that now. But so this is the kind of thing that we want to do, and we'd love to get some ideas from you all on other things that we should be looking at. So this is a bit of an eye chart. It's really just meant to show that Tyson and his team have been there for about a year. We've got, I don't know, 10, 12 papers that group's worked on that have already been either submitted and accepted or in the process of being submitted. And at the bottom there, it shows there's another 20 or so in the queue. So we've got a pretty high capacity. I told you in the first slide that one of the reasons we're doing this is we want Highmark to be known in the literature. And, this represents our first 30 or so programs that hopefully will take us in that direction. So I think we're making some progress. A number of these involve folks at Hershey, and the hope is that even more will in the future. So this is just sort of summarizing the kinds of data programs that we might work on together. You've got stuff that you need a large data set. We can go to Highmark for that. Maybe a way to join the EMR data from AHN with that data here. And we'd really love to take something that we worked on together that was used as preliminary data for grant applications to third-party funding agencies. Highmark is making a pretty significant investment in all the people that we've talked about and the seed grant programs, et cetera. It's important that I can demonstrate to them, not that their money's going to necessarily stop being spent, but because of their investment, we were able to bring in other resources that maybe couldn't have been accessed without their support. So that kind of story is helpful for me. So as you're thinking about these programs, if there's data that we could provide to help you write a grant application, et cetera, let's talk about what that data might look like. And then again, I think between the campuses and the team at Highmark and Highmark Health, I think we've got a lot of opportunities to work together. I've enjoyed the collaboration with the CTSI. It's been super helpful for us to get acquainted with people here at Hershey and at Penn State broadly. And we're just really looking forward to continuing that and doing more. So thank you for your time. I will stop sharing, and if we have time for questions, I'd love to take some.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith, for that fantastic presentation. The floor is open for any questions you might have. So feel free to use the chat if you want, or you can simply raise your hand in the Zoom room to let us hear your thoughts. Yes, Neil.
Hey, Keith. Good seeing you. Do you know how many of our patients have Highmark insurance? What the percentage is at Penn State Health?
I'm not muted. And
Do you mind just typing that into the...
I'm sorry, no, we may be able to hear you now.
Oh, you couldn't hear me?
I can hear you now perfectly.
All right. I thought I stumped you with my question, which wasn't hard.
No, yes, I was confused. Thank you.
Do you know what our percentage in Penn State Health across all our hospitals is that have Highmark insurance? What kind of numbers are we talking about?
I don't know that. I believe it's on the order of 1 in 5. But I don't know that number. So at AHN, that number is on the order of 1 in 2. And if we're asking about different conditions, that can vary. So it could be as high as 2/3 if we were talking about pregnancies and births. That represents a younger population, tends to be commercially insured or Medicaid, where we have pretty high density members in Western PA. So 2 in 3 might be. In other cases, that could be as low as 1 in 3. But that's what we see. I think at Hershey, it's 1 in 5. And I suspect, again, depending upon the condition, that number might vary. That does represent a challenge when you're trying to implement programs that involve a change to an insurance product, because you got to go through the process, and it can be challenging, especially if 4 and 5 members aren't going to qualify for something. So that can be a headache.
Larry.
For the spine stuff you discussed, Keith, have you thought about looking at, you had that nice slide versus CHAD score with the 2 lines branching. Have you thought about looking at rediscectomy in as a function of SDOH score? Some, I don't know how many you have, but and you guys have been getting that stuff now for 3 or 4 years. So I wonder if you'd have a big enough N to see if a bad profile influenced reoperation.
It's a good question. And we did not look at it in the data set that we had from Highmark, in large part because it was collected prior to us rolling out that SDOH work. We could potentially do that in a more recent data set. So it is possible to do that, because it's a 2-year period after the intervention. We'd probably be butting up against it. But that is an interesting thing to look at. What I didn't show in that slide, my boss is the head of neurosurgery at AHN, and one of our slides showed that the best way to avoid a fusion was to get your discectomy at AHN. And he loved that data and started bragging about it everywhere. At the end of the day, what we found was that it wasn't necessarily his surgeons. It was that AHN had protocolized the use of PT in that patient population. And what we saw was a high utilization of PT post-surgery. And I think as we look more big picture at the data, that really contributed to more positive outcomes for the patient population. So there's lots of ways that we did cut and slice that data set. Over time, we will have the ability to do more and more analyses with SDOH.
We have a question in the chat from Diane. She's asking, are any of the AHN sites currently a part of a GWEP, which I just learned a new term, a geriatric workforce enhancement program through HRSA?
I can find out. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know about the geriatric workforce enhancement. I will say that we are part of a large PCORI grant that is focused on our hospital elder care something program, HELP. Your geriatric question made me think of it. In this case, we do proactive screening for dementia and offer consultations for folks and family members, really with the hope of avoiding all sorts of length of stay issues that we have in the hospital. So we do have a pretty robust geriatric program at AHN. Lynn Weinberg oversees that program. I'm happy to take your question and get back to you with an answer to it.
Thanks for that, Keith. What other questions do we have from our audience?
Oh, it's Jen. Are there, I know we tried to hook up in the past year pharmacists to conduct some dual center trials around pharmacological interventions. Are there groups of investigators at AHN that we could match here? Are there certain pockets that are very active academically? Or is it scattered across like pretty much like we are?
It's definitely scattered. If we're talking specifically about pharmacy, pharmacy trainees at Duquesne University do all of their clinical rotations through Allegheny General Hospital and I think West Penn Hospital. And we do have some collaborative research programs with faculty members at Duquesne. I want to say there's a group of 4 or 5 folks that are routinely publishing and doing interventional studies. So in that particular space, Neil, I'd be happy to connect folks here with folks there to see if there's some joint interests. And by the way, that holds for practically any clinical area. So AHN, we don't have a medical school. We train roughly 600 residents in their postgraduate education and feel it important to offer them an opportunity to do scholarly work. We also feel it's important to offer our patients access to clinical trials. And then finally, for the types of doctors that we want to recruit and retain at AHN, we've got to give them opportunities to do research. But we don't have a ton of docs who have research protected time. Most of them who do it are doing it on the weekends and evenings. There are small pockets of folks who do research in every one of our clinical institutes. We publish roughly 600 or 700 journals in PubMed indexed papers in PubMed indexed journals annually. So we do actively participate in that sort of work, but it's a fraction of what would be done here. And it's really done in a small subset of people. So, if you asked me about radiation oncology, I could give you the names of 3 people who practically publish all of our papers in that space. So there are opportunities to do that. For me, it's pretty easy because in most cases, there's not a lot of people who are doing the work that I just described.
I have 2 quick questions for you. One is, if researchers or teams are interested in collaborating, is it your preference and process still that they should just reach out directly to you with their idea and then you would set them up with the right person?
I'm happy to serve as that conduit and to try and connect people. We do have other grants and contracts folks who could make those types of connections if we're going after specific funding opportunities. But for the most part, because for the last 10 years, I've overseen the Research Institute at AHN, and we're structured such that one administrative group oversees all of the research across all of the places. I know the folks who are doing research in most of those areas and can pretty quickly connect you to the right people. So for any interest, et cetera, I'm happy to serve as a conduit for that outreach.
Thank you. And I saw your contact information on the first slide. I also wanted to ask for those 700-800 papers and the subset of your clinicians who are publishing, is there a place where people can go to look for potential collaborators in areas of interest? We might have Pure or our Scopus website here at Penn State where we would look through potential collaborators, but do you have such a resource there?
It's a good question. We do have an AHN library, but it's an internal resource. We track those papers by clinical institute. So there are, since probably 2018, documented by clinical institute, every publication that's been in a PubMed index journal. So I can forward all of those and we could put them somewhere where if someone was interested in a certain subject matter or something, they could do a targeted search.
Or perhaps a PubMed search with Allegheny Health Network in quotes and then a topic area, and then that would elicit publications with that affiliation? Perhaps.
If you do that search under Allegheny Health and Allegheny General. So we have a challenge in that not everyone uses Allegheny Health Network every time that they publish, and the search queries that we run to collect all these things, we not only use AHN, which is being cited more and more frequently, but we also use the individual hospitals. And in some ways, those kinds of things are important for U.S. News and World Report rankings. So we want to encourage people to continue to use their hospital affiliation, because you don't get graded by U.S. News and World Report by your health network. You get it by your hospital. So we do still encourage people to do that, and they don't always also cite AHN when they do that. But I can very easily assemble that, and if you could help me park it somewhere here where people could find it, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I love that idea. And Keith has been an incredible partner for Penn State, particularly our CTSI. He credited the collaborations that we've helped facilitate, but I have to give that credit right back to him for the number of folks, some who are on this call who have submitted grants with letters of support from Keith and his team and collaborators. So thank you so much, Keith, for that. Thank you also. He mentioned our collaborative call for proposals. That was a huge, we're hugely grateful to Highmark and Allegheny Health Network for supporting those collaborative proposals between Penn State University and Allegheny Health Network. Any final questions from the group? So seeing none, we will absolutely make these slides available to everyone who's registered. So thank you for being here today. Thank you again, Keith, for everything that you do in collaboration, and looking forward to many more collaborations between our institutions.
Thanks everyone for your time.